welcome. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. This is really exciting. This is our first live stream of an advice session. It's great to have you all coming on. I'm Lilli Geissendorfer, I'm Director of Jerwood Arts, and I'm really pleased to be joined by artists Mark Corfield-Moore, Jessica Harrison, and Jasleen Kaur today. I'm getting a note that I've got reverb on, so I'm just going to try and reduce that. Right, so we're going to spend the next hour discussing their experiences of being selected for the previous editions of the Makers Open Awards, and we're hoping to demystify the application process. It's really great that so many of you have signed up for today's session. It's one of the silver linings of this pandemic that we're actually able to try new things that are enabling us to reach a lot more people than we would in real life at Jerwood Space in London. And we can have people joining from all over the UK, which is really important to us. The downside is that I'm a lot more nervous and the tech might not be as good. So we're assuming that most of you coming on to watch today are thinking about applying or currently crafting your applications. And we're hoping this conversation will provide some insights and encouragement to you all. It's not a Q&A, but if you have questions, please use the comments section below, and my colleague Miriam will do her best to answer within the comments. You can also email us at info@jerwoodarts.org with any questions arising from today. This session is being recorded as well as being live, so it will stay available until the deadline for applications, which is the 26th of August, 15 days away. And I'm going to start by saying a bit about the awards, introducing my very special guests, and then we'll get straight into it. So, what is Jerwood Art Fund Makers Open 2021? At its heart, it's a major award for 5 early career UK-based artists and makers to develop and present ambitious new works. This is the 8th edition, and it's now in collaboration between ourselves, Jerwood Arts, and Art Fund in a new touring partnership with Aberdeen Art Gallery in Scotland. It's open to individuals, collaborations, and collectives, and we are inviting proposals for bold new work or works using all forms of making and material experimentation. We welcome proposals for those working in all materials and progressive practices, including but not limited to ceramics, glass, jewellery, metal, paper, textiles, wood, fashion and sculpture. By early career, we mean artists and makers who have between 1 and 10 years of professional artistic practice and who are at a pivotal moment in developing that practice. We really want the award to be able to make a real difference to your experience and career so far and give you a significant national profile. So the 5 awards come with £8,000 each, plus curatorial and production support from the team here to make your new work over a 6-month period, ready for a group exhibition in London, followed by a 3-venue national tour through to 2022, which ends at Aberdeen Art Gallery. There is a selection panel who I'm incredibly excited about. It's made up of 3 artists, Dame Magdalena Odundo, who is a potter and ceramicist, Yinka Ilori, artist and designer, Junko Mori, who is an artist and a maker in metal, and they're joined by Christine Rue, the Art Gallery and Museums Manager at Aberdeen Art Gallery, and Harriet Cooper, who is my colleague here at Jerwood Arts. She's Head of Visual Arts. It's free to apply, and as I mentioned, the deadline is coming up on the Wednesday, the 26th of August at 5 p.m. Our website has all the details you need to apply, and so do head over there if you haven't already. One more thing I'd like to mention is that the current 2019 edition is getting ready to meet the public again at Manchester Art Gallery, where it's been since February. They're reopening on the 20th of August, so for anyone in and around Manchester watching, I can highly recommend you pay it a visit before it moves on the 4th of October. So, I'm going to introduce each of our guests very briefly. Below me on my screen, I've got Mark Corfield-Moore, who was born in Bangkok, Thailand, and lives and works in London. He's currently part of the touring edition at Manchester Art Gallery, and he graduated with a postgraduate diploma from the Royal Academy Schools in 2018, and with a bachelor's degree in fine art at Central St Martin's College of Art and Design in 2015. Mark is also currently exhibiting new work in a group exhibition called Common Thread at New Art Centre in Salisbury. Jessica Harrison, born in St Bees, England, is an artist based in Edinburgh. She was a 2017 awardee and is an academician of the Royal Scottish Academy since 2015 and graduated with a PhD in sculpture from the Edinburgh University in 2013. I had the joy of seeing Jessica's work when I was on the panel for the British Ceramics Biennial last year in Stoke-on-Trent. And last but not least, Jasleen Kaur, who was born in Glasgow and is based in London, and she was a 2015 awardee. Her work is an ongoing exploration in the malleability of culture and the layering of social histories. Her practice examines diasporic identity and hierarchies of history, both colonial and personal, and she works with sculpture, video, sound, and writing. Jessica and Jasleen have since gone on to become artist advisors here at Jerwood Arts, so they also have first-hand experience of reading and reviewing applications to our other funding programs. And of course, all of them have lots of experience of applying for open commissions. So to break the ice and warm us up, a quick fire round of questions. Don't be daunted, I promise you'll know all the answers. Can you help me finish this sentence? Applying for open commission awards is ... Jessica.
I'll go for pretty exhausting.
Pretty exhausting. Can I ask you to speak up a tiny bit?
I'll go a little bit closer. How's that? You can see all my wrinkles now, which is not so good. But...
Thank you. Jasleen.
It was applying for Jerwood, applying for the Makers Award is, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Like this, this opportunity to buy yourself time, literally, to be able to buy yourself time in the studio to kind of really involve yourself in your making practices or in your practice in a way that like daily life and economies of our art world just doesn't always allow.
Thank you. What about you, Mark?
I was going to say it is hard because when you talk about emerging, I was so emerging, as in I just left my MA, and it was I hadn't applied for anything before, so it was the first thing I'd ever applied for. But I applied because, as I said, I just left formal education, so I was really just taking my first steps into the professional art world. So yeah, to have a project that I know was going to be realised in 6 months, it really gave me a focus, something to focus to, when everything else maybe seemed a bit daunting at first. So yeah, if anything, it was just great to know I had something to look forward to and to make to in 6 months' time. And as Jasleen said, something, yeah, you'll be able to do it.
Thank you all. That's a brilliant starting point. So can you tell me what you made for your commissions? And for those of you who want to see these commissions, there's a link in the comments to a page on our website with images and biogs of all the previous awardees. So you can scroll down and take a look while you listen to their very makers talking about them. Let's start this time with Jasleen.
I knew you were going to do that. I feel like I have to go back quite a way in my head. Like, although it was only 2015, I think a lot. I guess we'll talk a bit more about that. But it felt like the beginning of a real shift in my practice. So, the work, like to me, it feels like if I was to make it now, that's not what it would be. So I'm having to like backtrack and speak a little bit from where I was at the time, but also contextualize it and like, or like speak about it in like where I am now. But I was making a set of 3 busts that were made out of a polyurethane plastic, a marbled polyurethane plastic. And I guess like I was having to read back my proposal to try and track back where my head was at. But I guess I was beginning by looking at the ideologies and maybe the differences between sculpture that are like Western European and non-Western European. And I was really thinking about my own heritage as from South Asia, from India, and grown up in the diaspora, and what is sculpture in my home life or in my kind of daily practices. And I was weighing up these kind of differences of like at the British Museum or at the V&A, you've got sculptures which are the busts are to revere someone, to historicize someone, to almost like make someone more godlike, and they are objects that are not for, they don't interact in any kind of human contact. They are not to be touched. And at the time I was doing a lot of running a lot of workshops for different cultural organisations and institutions. I was at the V&A quite a lot, running workshops on their schools programme, and I would like find myself walking through corridors from like Asia to the Europe corridor, and like that. I guess that like, I think that's maybe what got me thinking about that shift in the function of a sculpture or the context in which a sculpture exists in. So you're moving from like, on the other hand, you've got sculptures which are there for worship, they are for their function is for prayer, or they are cleaned or offered foods. They are bathed in milk. They're almost humanized in that sense through this process of offering, and they are most certainly touched, and they have a function which was so different to these other like colonial sculptures or the Western European type. And so I was playing with these types, I guess, and I wanted to make a set of sculptures, make a set of busts that were maybe about memorializing or commemorating something that I could speak from, a position that I could speak from, and so these 3 figures that I picked were directly related to my own history, I guess, and they were made, or I wanted to kind of flip and play with the word marble, I guess, like I wanted to mimic the marbling that you see on cheap plastic marble buckets or like bath stools, and this is definitely that was definitely like a reference that I guess has creeped into my work a lot, growing up in a hardware shop and growing up in cash and carries, and that kind of really playing with like what is cheap and what is perceived as of lower value. And so the material shift then spoke to like going from expensive marble to cheap marble. That shift was also a metaphor for what was going on in the figures or who was being portrayed. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to hear you talk about the different layers of how you were linking to your biography, how you were flipping and playing with concepts of what sculpture is, but also playing with materials and experimenting with them as well. Yeah. Mark, can you tell us about the work you made?
Yes, so I made weavings, large-scale weavings that are loosely based on Asian ikat. And the subject of the matter was based on historical firework prints from the 18th century, which I'd found in an archive. But I think the reason I really wanted to apply for the Makers Open Award is I didn't feel like I was particularly an expert in my field of weaving. I'd only really been weaving for a year before applying for the award, but I'd never had that amount of money given to me before. So I really used it as a chance to invest in my practice and my education. So as Lilli said earlier, I did a fine art MA, but it was a really small school and they didn't really have a textiles department. So I was largely self-taught. So with the award, I basically gave myself a syllabus I've always wanted to have. So I took myself off to Scotland and learned tartan making and registered an official tartan. And then I also went back to Thailand and stayed with my cousin out there weaving with some of the women in her village. And it was a year ago that I found out my grandmother was also a weaver. Not that I unfortunately ever met her, but I don't know, with this prize, it was just a really amazing chance to do a lot of traveling and to learn certain techniques that I just wish I could have learned. So it really provided a sort of a formal training in my process that I really wanted.
Thank you, Mark. I remember your application really well because that dream syllabus, I think you wrote about that in your application, about giving you the opportunity to kind of fill the gaps and learn skills and create your own self-directed kind of independent course of further study, building on sort of the very early stages of where you'd got to with your weaving techniques and practice. So yeah, very different starting point in some ways from Jasleen. But yeah, beautiful weavings. And as I said, you can still see them on tour for the foreseeable. So, Jessica, come hear a bit about what you made. Oh, you're on mute, or you've gone very mute.
Now.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see if you go back again. Yes, my installation for the Makers Open was in 2017, which feels like a really long time ago, but at the same time feels like it's just happened. It was a very intense period of time, but it was fantastic. And I ended up making it was one large installation. So it was I think it was like 58 porcelain objects, hand-built works, but it formed like one complete work that was there was a glaze that sort of was mimicked across the whole installation. So it was sort of one piece, but at the same time it was 58 different pieces. So it took up the whole sort of length of the big room in the Jerwood space. And yeah, much like Mark, it was ceramics was something that I'd come to really quite recently at that point. And I really didn't know much about it. And I'd missed out on the opportunity to get the skills in that material at art school. I studied sculpture at Edinburgh College of Art, where there had originally been a ceramics department when I started the degree, but I think I was about halfway through the sculpture degree, and they started closing down these sorts of departments, and sadly that was one of the departments that did close, and all of the those facilities and materials were just kind of overnight, it felt like disappeared, as well as all of the knowledge along with it, and the expertise. So when I came to wanting to work in ceramics quite a few years later, it was very much, I wouldn't even say like self-taught, it was just kind of making it up as I went along and seeing what happened. And so by the time I came to apply for the Makers Open, I'd sort of had the opportunity to do like one project, but I felt like I was really like winging it for that project. So this came along at just the right time when you know, I really wanted to kind of get to grips with it and do something a bit more ambitious. And yeah, I was really happy with how it all turned out in the end. It was a great experience. But as I said, yeah, very sort of intense working 6 months.
Thank you. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience of preparing your proposal? I'm going to go straight back to you, Jessica. You've all said a little bit about how you were at different stages in terms of when this opportunity came along. What was it like to prepare your proposal idea for the award? How did you go about working that up? And did you learn anything about yourself or your practice when you were writing that application, perhaps?
Yeah, my proposal was it was maybe a bit unusual in that I wasn't really quite decided what I wanted to do. I was sure that I wanted to work with ceramics, but I was quite vague, really, about what it was I exactly wanted to do. I sort of knew the kind of conceptual areas I wanted to explore, but yeah, my actual proposal itself, I didn't really say specifically what I wanted to do, which is, you know, if I was advising someone else on making an application, I would say, you know, give them a real clarity about what you want to do, which isn't what I did at all. So I'm a little bit of a hypocrite, but and it was actually in the interview process, it became more of a kind of conversation about where I might possibly go. In fact, I think I gave like, in my proposal, I gave sort of 3 strands, 3 possible directions that I could go in with this sort of general idea that I'd had. But I was certain that I wanted to make an installation in porcelain specifically, and then it was kind of, yeah, from there I felt like I could kind of go in a number of different directions, and I was sort of swithering about which one to do.
Right, yeah. I think that we certainly see that push and pull between concept and very specific practical clarity around a very specific object or objects or works in proposals. I guess it's really great to hear you talk about the fact that in your case the concept was really strong, whereas you had a really open mind still about where exactly that proposal might land in terms of what it might actually be. I think anyone listening to this should take from that a reassurance that you don't have to have all the answers at this moment when you're applying.
What did work in my favour with my proposal, although it was quite vague in some ways, I was definite about how I was going to make the work. You know, it was like I wanted to do a larger installation, but I knew where I could do it, and I knew like how I could do it and how much it would cost and how I would move all the works around. You know, I had the very clear idea about that, so it was I think that probably helped my application in the later stages.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Where you do have clarity, be clear. Where you do know your mind, where you're feeling confident, but it's also really great to be clear about what's not resolved yet, what you're going to be researching, what questions you still have to reflect on. It is a developmental opportunity, and there is support available through the 6 months of making. So, yeah, I think it's really great to hear a bit more about where you were at with when you were putting your proposal together. Jasleen, can I ask you to say a bit more about that, if you can take your mind back?
Yeah, I was same as Mark, really. It was the first thing I really applied for. I wasn't in the swing of application writing at that point. I was 5 years out of studying my MA, and I guess I was at a point of, I guess I mentioned before, that kind of like knowing that I was at a point of transition in my practice in 2015, early 16. A lot of opportunities helped me shift that kind of stuckness that I was feeling, and part of that was because I studied under metalwork and jewellery. So my education and my background is all very specific and really rooted in the crafts. And I post MA, I never felt quite aligned to the crafts. I think that the crafts in the UK context for me was quite anemic in providing me with like a sense of, like, I couldn't see myself reflected in it. And so post-graduating, I started to like maybe position my work in design a little bit more. I think that was to get away with doing stuff. Like I could get away with setting up a cinema van in the street and make food for people, right? Like I think I was just trying to find my place. And so coming to the proposal, I was interested in using this opportunity to break away from using ready-mades that I was relying on and really enjoying using during my education, but maybe feeling like I was getting like, since my education was in like fine jewellery work and I was constantly trying to break out of that, I needed some time, a lot like resonating with what Jessica and Mark is saying. I needed some time to spend time with another material. And so my proposal was, it was quite fixed in that I was quite clear that I wanted to make this series of busts. And through like the costing up processes of that, or figuring out like what material is going to work for me, who can I work with to help me make molds, that kind of directed quite a lot of what I had to be sure about in the proposal, and then what could happen in the making of the work. Like there was some initial outlays that meant that the kind of funds were used up, but that's also what was really exciting about this, that I could scale up my work in a way that I'd never been able to do. I could break out of the relying on ready-mades. I could try and like, I think what I wanted to do was like, I guess when I say that I was relying on ready-mades, like I was doing a lot of like cutting and pasting with found objects to speak. I guess it felt like a language that I was using, and they were certainly about kind of neither being here nor there, right? Like they were kind of a new I was making things that maybe existed for this new space, and I wanted to see if I could do that by starting from scratch, or using material that then I could direct and not rely so much on the fact that you could see that that was a shoe or that was a bucket. So I think that's what I was quite clear in the proposal writing of what I knew that I could achieve with X amount of money and X amount of time.
Thank you. That's so great to hear about how you built up clearly did a lot of research as part of the process of putting together your application. I think it's also really interesting you touching on your educational route and your background and training. There is no fixed or right educational background or route through to this award. In fact, there's no educational requirements at all, and it's not something that we take into account. It's very forward-looking in that sense. It's all about the idea and the proposal that you put forward. But I think it's really interesting to note that your initial training around jewellery, it was all very much more in that craft world. And this award sits at that intersection between the visual arts and what is more traditionally thought of as crafts or applied arts. And we're really looking at having a critical dialogue, both through the processes of the awardees and their making processes, and then through the exhibition opportunity with the wider visual arts community about the relevance of making practices and materials, and how we position that is really exciting and really interesting kind of crux at the heart of the kind of the award itself. So thank you for sharing exactly what that feels like when you're trying to position yourself and having to kind of switch identities from design or now I'm an installation artist, now I'm a sculpture artist, in order to be taken seriously in different ways, or your work to be valued in these very often contradictory spaces. Mark, you were also a first-time applicant.
Yes. Yeah, no, I was, and I think I had the same thing as Jessica. I think there were certain things that I was very sure about, sort of what the process and materials I would be using were. But if I'm being completely honest, in terms of the subject matter, that was still up for grabs, and I changed my proposal completely, in the sense that I said I was going to be making work about this cheetah called Miss Jenny, but then after just spending some time in Scotland and Thailand, I kind of feel like I do this with my practice anyway. I collect characters or histories, and I just know when they seem more urgent to make work about, and it just didn't seem like it was making sense. But I remember being quite nervous during a sort of a checkpoint meeting with the Jerwood arts team, and I was like, oh, I think I might be changing it slightly, but they couldn't have been nicer, and they were just like, you do whatever you want. So I kind of feel like it kind of felt like at that point it was more about you and your practice rather than about your application. Like, no one was really holding your application as a checkpoint as to what you said you would do. In saying that, I was really sure about certain things. So I was really sure about my budget, for example, but not quite sure about the subject matter or what these weavings would look like in the end, even though they were going to be weavings. And I kind of don't know if I should say it out loud, but I kind of think try and be as specific as you can. And I went to the interview with this idea, but in the back knowing it could slightly change as well. So I don't know, it's very difficult, I think, if you're interviewing someone, like, just try and be as sure as you can, but in the back, if you do change your mind later down the road, it's not the worst thing in the world either. And I also think it's difficult for any artist to exactly express what they're going to make, how they're going to make it, exactly what it's going to be in 6 months' time. Like, it's a creative process like anything. So yeah, there's going to be changes, and I think, yeah, the Jerwood Arts team were really supportive of that. So yeah, in terms of if you're making your application now, just know what are the things you're really sure about, and because not everyone is sure about it entirely. I think is that okay to say?
It's very okay to say, and I think if I can be so bold, the current context we're living in means that I'd be very surprised if anyone's proposal didn't go through, in some cases possibly, changes because of outside restrictions needing to come into play and preventing certain journeys from being made, perhaps, and so on. Yeah, I think we're always open to the fact that the award is, as I said before, a developmental opportunity. So the most confident articulation doesn't mean it won't, the learning and research and the process itself won't bring up new ideas that then feel more urgent and more important. We very much want to be led by the artists and what they need to do, and try and enable and facilitate that as best as possible. You touched on the selection process, and there is an interview, and I shared who the panelists are at the start. Jessica and Jasleen, can I invite you to say a bit more? What was the selection process like? Do you have any reflections that might be useful for those watching to understand?
Well, I was really pleased to be shortlisted, but when it got to the interview stage, I felt like I had one of the worst interviews I've ever had for the Makers Open. I mean, it went so badly that I came out of there thinking, well, at least I've had a nice trip to London. I've seen some exhibitions, it's good practice, so I was quite I'd come to terms with it already, and that I wasn't going to progress any further. I think it was like really the first half of the interview. I sort of built it up as to be such this like good thing that would make such a difference. I'd be able to like make a whole new body of work that when I came to talk about it, I was just like, blah, 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 blah. It was just nonsense that was sort of spewing out of me. And I think it was actually Claire Toomey on the panel that year said, just stop. Let's just have a chat. Don't worry about it. We'll just, start again. So the second half of the interview was much better because it just became more of this conversation type thing that I sort of touched on earlier, where I stopped worrying about just like it being a presentation, and it became more of this conversation of how things could possibly evolve. And so it got a little bit better after that. But I was still really surprised when I got the phone call to tell me that I'd been chosen as one of the makers that year. And I think even the person I spoke to on the phone was quite surprised, because she'd been in the interview as well and had agreed that it was a particularly painful interview. So even to the people out there who the interview isn't always their strongest point, there's still hope for you if you have like a good idea and some enough enthusiasm behind your work. You can still make it through. So
yeah, I think that's really true. I think if I may say so, I think Mark might have felt similarly about his interview. Jasleen, did you have a positive interview, or was yours, did you feel like it was a car crash as well?
I think I actually cried when I got out of it.
Oh no.
I just wanted to say, first of all, that I'm so heartened to hear who's on the panel this year. And I think a lot has shifted from when I was interviewed in 2015 in terms of who is the makeup of that panel and how your work is received, right, and read, and therefore in that interview stage, like what kind of conversation can come, because it felt, the thing that I'd say about my memory of my interview is that I was shit scared for one. Like I was really daunted by the size of the panel, and I was really nervous anyway, because I'm not someone who is well versed at like the processes of applying and interviewing, or I'm certainly not confident about it. Imposter syndrome is really real, and I think that made me feel, you know, I now teach, and we're having these conversations within the institution of like, what is the function of an interview, right? And if we are wanting to invite people in who've never interviewed before, or like don't know the game of the interview, like what are the questions that we need to be asking? And I really feel like being on the working with Jerwood since, and like seeing the kind of line of questioning that Jerwood are posing to us, and to structure the organisation is really brilliant. And what you said earlier, Lilli, about like there's absolutely no requirement for formal education, and I think that's really forward thinking as an organisation. Sorry, I'm going to come back to the question about the interview. But I would say that the people on my on the panel, they felt really invested in the work, or like it didn't feel like a bureaucratic process. It felt like there was genuine, there was a point where there was a bit of a tussle between like the panel members about the work, and I really liked that, because it was like, oh, this isn't just some process that I slip in and slip out of. This is like, there's a care for the work or the content or the discussion that it brings up. But yeah, I think all interviews are just nerve-wracking anyway, but and similarly, Jessica walked out thinking, all right, that's that then. that's that done with.
Yeah, well, it's not over till it's over, is it? I think it's never great to hear that you put people through such a ringer. But I hope that this year's interview process will be the kindest version of it yet. And even if it feels awful in the moment, we'll kind of follow up with people and make sure they're okay. But that's really nice to hear you're excited about the panel. I'm really excited about the panel. I think that they bring their taste and experience. They do have they do tussle over it. I think that's a real feature of why interviews, why a panel, because they will disagree, and it will be, there is huge care, and I think that's really exciting. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions about what it was like to sort of produce the works for the exhibition, and kind of where it took your work, your career, following on from that exhibition at Jerwood Space and then the tour. Yeah, particularly, I guess, Mark, it's only been at Manchester Art Gallery so far. It's still going on, so but yeah, and Jerwood, of course. But yeah, any reflections on what it was like to have it on tour for such a long time and in different places, and kind of
Yeah, I think wanted to touch on something that Jasleen said earlier about sort of trying to whether or not you thought your practice could be read through a craft perspective, or wondering what craft really meant. And I felt, if I'm being completely honest, maybe I was so new to it all that I didn't realize that makers was a term in itself. I just applied being like, oh, we're all makers, really. But I think what I really liked about the award was there's an opportunity for you to do an in-conversation with someone, and for you to sort of reach out to someone that you respected or that's in a particular field. So I definitely felt like I could shape the narrative that my work was seen in. So I just had a wish list, and at the top was Anne Coxon, who just curated the Annie Albert show at the Tate Modern. And I was just like, well, because someone who's weaving but struggles with the idea of maybe, I've just always viewed myself as an artist, and my weavings are more like images rather than, I don't know, a craft maybe. So I was just really happy to be able to sort of dictate how my work was viewed and who was talking about it and the context of it. So yeah, I hope anyone doesn't apply because they think, oh, that's a craft award and I'm more of a fine artist, or whatever that means nowadays. Like, I just feel like within the program, you really have quite a lot of control over it yourself. And then talking about where it goes on to tour to. So yeah, just the other exhibition venues. There's one that was the National Centre of Craft and Design, which was like a beautiful space, but then equally it moves on to something like Manchester Fine Art Gallery. So I just feel like, yeah, different venues, different audiences, but ultimately great that it gets to be on show for so long.
Thanks, Mark. Jessica, I can't actually remember where 2017 toured to. It's before my time. What was it like for you realising the works and then seeing them around the country?
Well, it was fantastic to go on tour. I mean, it's really exciting just to go on tour anyway, anywhere, and to be like, you know, to sort of have that opportunity for all these other communities to see what you've been up to. I think my work was maybe the different venues that were for 2017 Makers Open. They varied quite a lot in the sort of size and the format of the spaces. So I think it was a challenge in each space how everything fitted together, and it worked so well in the space in London that each venue, it was always like a slight worry, like how is it going to work in this new place? And for me, from my work, it did vary quite a lot. Some of the spaces it just wasn't as successful because of the format and the lighting, but other venues it worked really well. So I think it was a great learning experience in that way, because normally I'm making something that's just for like one gallery or one institution. So you have that space in mind, and you maybe make it specifically for that, but to have this piece sort of have to fit these different spaces, it was a really interesting process, one that was quite stressful sometimes, but really useful for sort of learning things, tools and skills for future tours. Yeah, I can't even remember where we went. I know we ended up at the Pier Arts Centre in Orkney, which was fantastic.
I was just going to say, I think you went very far north, which we haven't been back there yet. That was quite a journey for the work, I think, as well.
And it's a great venue up there. It's really worth going there to see. But yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I pick up with you, Jasleen? Any reflections on what it was like to have these busts finally made?
Yeah, and do you want me to focus on the touring aspect? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, whatever feels. I'm interested in that final process of installing the works and being part of a group exhibition. Yeah. What that kind of learning and opportunity of that. It
was. I I've never had work toured in that way, so it was like my experience of it was extremely well organised, and the work was really well cared for, and there was budget to have the work installed, so there was like everything seemed to be thought about, and I could give I think because the work that I had made was so contained, like there was not much margin for error actually, and it could be installed pretty much anyway. And in that sense, it was quite unambitious in its installation, which is something I'd rethink about, I think, if I was to reapply. But in that sense, it was quite an easy process to hand over and just give instructions for that to happen. But I maybe wanted to just, in 2015, we toured to Ruthin, Plymouth College of Art and Touchstones in Rochdale, and at the time also Eleanor Morgan, who's a curator at MIMA now, was the writer in residence at Jerwood. And I bring that all up because I was thinking about this before we jumped on this call, about how like having audiences for your work and how powerful that can be, and in building up relationships with, like, I'm currently working with Mark Doyle, who's a curator. He was just newly appointed to curator at Touchstones in Rochdale. And I don't say that to, like, I hope that doesn't sound nepotistic, it actually probably does, but I think I'm talking about like how, who is it that's seen your work and like what relationships can come from that. And similarly, like having a conversation with Eleanor, who was writing up about the Jerwood Award at that time. You know, I'd never had a conversation with a curator before that was all new to me. And I remember actually, sorry Eleanor, being really scared of speaking to Eleanor, but like we've since worked together, and I'm so grateful for that conversation, with that critical conversation in my work, and that I feel like is really come from that award. Like it's not come about from any other way. And of course, I think it's like so exciting that the work just moves outwards from like gets out of London. I think that's also just a really important thing.
Jessica, Mark, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, one of the things that I really benefited from Makers Open was meeting all the other makers as well. And I know those based in London probably already kind of know each other a little bit. People have come across each other a bit more, but being based up in Scotland, I have less sort of contact with and also being new to the material of ceramics, I wasn't really in that world very much. So yeah, to meet the other artists, and there's quite a lot of opportunities to talk and to get to know each other with the different events and things. That was really good. And I've noticed with other things that I've done, that it hasn't really been. I assumed that everything would be like that, but it's not. I think it's a really good aspect of it that yeah, I wouldn't have expected. So.
Sorry. Did you want to chip in, Mark? Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I just go on with what you just said, Jessica. But yeah, our tour is still going on, and we still get to meet each other at these different cities and catch up. And I'm actually in a show with someone else who I met at Jerwood now. So yeah, it's just really nice to form this new community, and also your relationship with Jerwood. I know that you both are still working with them now, and I still keep the Jerwood Arts team updated, and it doesn't feel like it's just support during that six-month window, but much more wider, and and so I'm really appreciative of that.
Right, final question. Let's see, we've got 3 minutes left. So 1 minute each to leave your kind of parting advice for this edition's applicants. What would you tell yourself now in hindsight about applying? What one or maybe two nuggets of advice would you give yourself, or would you like to give others?
Well, I would tell myself not to worry so much about interviews, and I almost didn't even apply because, like we were talking about before, I wasn't sure if it was really an appropriate thing for me to be doing with that craft art thing. But I decided, you know, it looks like a great opportunity. Jerwood's a great arts body. And every application you do is good practice for the next one, even if you don't manage to progress. Each time you do one, you get a little bit better at it, I think. So advice for other people, I would say, yeah, the clarity of, really take some time to work out your budget. It's really important to be able to show, how you're going to spend the money if you get it. And, think about things like the creating of the works, photography, all the sort of boring extra bits. Remember to factor all those in as well to your timeline and to your budget and everything. It's all the boring stuff as well as the sort of exciting conceptual and the making bit. Yeah, I think that's really important.
Brilliant advice. Yep. Jasleen.
Oh, I find questions like this so difficult, so I'm sorry for probably really rubbish response. But Jessica, everything you've said, absolutely, I agree. Something I did was make some material samples before going into the award, before going into the interview, and that as a kind of nervous maker, or I never really have enough skills to go off of, that gave me a bit of confidence. And it was also actually just really exciting to see what the possibilities could be of scaling this up into a larger mold, and what kind of movements we're going to create, what kind of cast. So it's not always an option, but some kind of visualization or something to touch actually was a good thing for me to do personally, and then to take into the interview. And then I'd say maybe just do some about apply with something that you're hungry to explore. I've written a lot of applications since, and you kind of know when I kind of know when I'm struggling to come up with the thing that's not going to manifest, and that's just not going to happen. But I think going with your gut and finding that thing that you're genuinely intrigued by and excited to spend time with is usually the thing to go with. So I think that's what I'd say. I'm also saying that to myself actually in future writing of proposals. So yeah.
Yeah, gut is a good and slightly unquantifiable instinctive thing, isn't it? But it does have a role to play. Mark, what's your parting advice?
I think it would be to don't worry if you haven't completely mastered this process. You don't have to be the top of your field in order to get this prize. It's more about a willingness and a desire to learn more about a process. And if anything, I think, don't want it to be too cheesy, but I think this award, yes, I made 3 weavings that I'm really pleased with, but I kind of feel like it was a massive development in my practice more than the resulting work. So for that reason, I feel yeah, you get 6 months, the biggest budget I've ever worked with, and yeah, I think just apply.
What an amazing finisher. Thank you all so much. We're only 1 minute over, I think. So hopefully everyone has stayed with us. I found that hugely inspiring, and also just, reassuring that despite some of the challenges and obvious problems with these sorts of processes, it is really, really worth it, and it's brilliant to see what you've all been doing since. So big round of applause here in my home office to you all. Thank you very, very much to everybody who's tuned in. Let's wave you out, I think.